I moved to Riverbend Greens thinking it would be a quiet haven for my retirement years. After 35 years in law enforcement, 20 of those as chief of police in a bustling city, I was ready for peaceful days and friendly neighbors. The real estate brochures promised manicured lawns, tree-lined sidewalks, and a warm community spirit. For a time, that's exactly what I found. Until a meddling homeowner association, HOA, Vice President Beatrice Arntley, known more commonly as Karen, began stirring up trouble. Karen was in her mid-50s, always wearing meticulously pressed slacks and brandishing a clipboard that served as her scepter of authority. She acted as if the entire neighborhood was her personal kingdom, thrusting her opinions on everyone and lording her position over timid residents. A casual observer might assume she was just an overzealous busybody. But I, James Hoffman, a newly retired law enforcement officer, saw a more volatile streak lurking beneath her prim exterior. It was only a matter of time before that dark side erupted. No one, however, anticipated how extreme her outbursts would become. An argument at an HOA meeting, a flash of unchecked rage, and suddenly, Karen was assaulting retirees and making the grave mistake of targeting me. Unbeknownst to her, I was used to dealing with violent criminals. I had once commanded citywide SWAT operations. Karen had picked the wrong neighbor to bully. This is the story of how an HOA's self-proclaimed queen unleashed physical aggression on innocent folks, oblivious to the fact that I, a retired chief of police, was prepared to respond decisively. By the time the dust settled, Karen found herself in handcuffs, her property seized, and her reign of terror concluded in the most public and humiliating way possible. Riverbend Greens was initially everything I had hoped for. A tranquil suburban development with gently winding streets and front yards perfectly groomed by enthusiastic homeowners. The modest yet tasteful houses were arranged around a central pond, where ducks and geese gathered every morning. Since I was newly retired, I delighted in simple pleasures, fishing at dawn, chatting with neighbors, sipping coffee on my porch. Shortly after moving in, I received a glossy HOA brochure in the mail, detailing the bylaws, contact information, and the board's leadership structure. The HOA president, a kindly man named George Patel, seemed approachable. But the vice president, Beatrice Arntley, Karen, exuded an air of self-importance even in her profile photo. Chin tilted high, eyes glaring as if daring anyone to violate the rules. The first time I encountered Karen was at the mailbox kiosk near the clubhouse. She was berating a bewildered older woman. Something about leaving trash cans by the curb too long after pickup. Karen spoke in clipped, rapid sentences, brandishing her clipboard as if it were a judge's gavel. The woman kept apologizing and promising to do better, while Karen's tone grew sharper, her stance rigid. I intervened gently, stepping between them. "Everything okay here?" I asked, injecting calm authority into my voice. I'd used that same tone countless times on the job, one that typically diffuses tension. Karen whirled to face me, eyes narrowed. She scanned me from head to toe. "Sir, this is HOA business," she said curtly. "No reason to get involved." I gave her a polite smile. "Actually, I'm a new resident. My name is James Hoffman. Is there some kind of misunderstanding with Ms.?" I glanced at the older woman. "I'm Mary Ann," she said, trembling slightly. "I just forgot to will my bin back in time. I had an appointment." Karen snorted. "That's no excuse. Rules are rules." Mary Ann seemed on the verge of tears. I rested a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Let's ease up. I'm sure she'll remember next time." Karen frowned, but said nothing further. She turned on her heel, marched to her car, and drove off without a goodbye. Mary Ann exhaled in relief. "Thank you," she murmured. "Karen can be intense." I nodded. The feeling in my gut told me this woman could become a real problem. Little did I know how swiftly that prediction would come true. In the weeks that followed, I kept hearing more Karen stories from neighbors. Some found her irritating but harmless, sending out petty violation notices, complaining about the color of garden gnomes or the length of grass. Others recounted more troubling tales. She once threatened to fine a family $500 for letting their kids play with chalk on the sidewalk. She'd scold seniors for feeding birds near the pond, claiming the HOA restricted feeding wildlife, though no such rule existed. "She acts like we're at her mercy," one elderly neighbor, Brian, told me. "Everyone's afraid of her." She's been known to show up at people's houses unannounced, pointing out infractions like a detective. President Patel tries to rein her in, but she essentially runs the show. I frowned. Why does anyone put up with this? Brian shrugged. People don't want trouble, so they pay the fines or do as she says. It bothered me deeply. In my decades on the force, I'd seen how bullies thrived on fear. All it took was one person standing up for what was right to unravel a tyrant's hold. But I also recognized that many residents were older, on fixed incomes, and didn't want confrontation. Karen leveraged that vulnerability, presenting herself as unstoppable. I resolved to keep an eye out. While I had no desire to be the neighborhood savior, I couldn't abide an abusive figure terrorizing folks, especially retirees. That vow, though, only set the stage for the explosive events to come. Eventually, an official HOA meeting was announced for mid-June. The agenda, posted on the community bulletin board, mentioned budget proposals, landscaping contracts, new bylaw proposals, and open forum. Since I believed in civic engagement, I decided to attend. Besides, it sounded like a good opportunity to observe Karen in a formal setting and see how the board functioned. The night of the meeting, I walked into the clubhouse's multi-purpose room and found it abuzz with conversation. Roughly 30 residents sat in chairs arranged before a long table where the HOA board members would sit. President George Patel, a mild-mannered gentleman with a friendly smile, greeted me warmly. "Good evening, Mr. Hoffman. Glad you could make it. I thought it'd be good to see things firsthand," I said, shaking his hand. "Is Ms. Arntley around?" George's smile wavered. "She's here, preparing her notes. She'll be leading a few agenda items." With that, he gestured toward the front, where Karen stacked a small tower of files. She wore a crisp blazer that seemed one size too tight, her eyes scanning the room with an air of scrutiny. I took a seat near the back. Neighbors I'd befriended, Mary Ann, Brian, and a few others, sat nearby, exchanging nervous glances. When the meeting began, George welcomed everyone, then handed the mic to Karen to discuss bylaw amendments. She launched into a monologue about maintaining the highest standards. The gist: she wanted stricter rules about lawn decorations, holiday lights, and an elevated schedule of fines. As she spoke, the tension in the room grew palpable. A few residents tried to voice concerns, but Karen either cut them off or dismissed them. She had the skill of a politician who yields the microphone only on her own terms. For a moment, I felt my old law enforcement instincts stir, wanting to set boundaries, but I stayed quiet, letting the process unfold. Partway through the meeting, the discussion veered off script when an elderly resident, Mr. Daly, brought up an upcoming local election for the county commissioners. He mentioned how certain commissioners' decisions might affect property taxes and how the HOA could better use funds to assist seniors who struggled financially. Karen's face turned rigid. "The HOA is not a charity," she snapped. "We won't reduce fees just because some residents can't keep up. That's how neighborhoods degrade." Several seniors gasped at her callousness. Mr. Daly tried to reason with her, mentioning that seniors on fixed incomes could use more leniency, or at least a payment plan for fines. Karen cut him off. "Our bylaws aren't up for compromise. If you can't afford it, maybe you should move." That remark set off a small uproar. Even George looked aghast. A handful of retirees murmured indignation. Mr. Daly, his voice trembling with emotion, retorted, "These are our homes. We have every right to stay." Karen's expression darkened, then learned to follow the rules without complaining. I couldn't sit by. I rose and spoke clearly, my tone calm but firm. "Ms. Arntley, it's not unreasonable for neighbors to ask for fair consideration. We're talking about respected community members who've contributed here for years." She whirled to face me, eyes blazing. "Who are you to question my authority? You're new, and you have no idea how unruly this neighborhood would get if I didn't maintain order." I locked eyes with her. "I was the chief of police for a major city, Ms. Arntley. I know all about maintaining order, through fairness and respect, not intimidation." A stunned hush fell. Karen's mouth opened and closed, as if she didn't know whether to lash out or retreat. Her cheeks flushed red. "This meeting is not about your past career," she huffed, regaining composure. "We have more important matters than indulging soft-hearted retirees who want freebies." The hostility in her voice struck me as a red flag. Deep down, I sensed she was close to snapping. Little did I realize how far her fury would push her. The next agenda item was the open forum, allowing residents to speak on any community matter. A handful of seniors bravely lined up to express concerns. Marion shared her fear of being fined for petty issues. Brian talked about how the HOA budget was spent on elaborate landscaping, ignoring broken sidewalks that made it dangerous for older residents. Each time someone voiced criticism, Karen bristled. At first, she tried cutting them off with curt responses. Eventually, she lost her temper. "I am sick of these complaints," she shouted into the microphone. "Some of you act like children who can't follow rules. I'm done coddling you." Gasps rippled across the crowd. George tried to intervene. "Karen, maybe we can address these concerns, Civ." She slammed her palm on the table. "They need to respect the system we have in place. You're all just stirring up trouble." Her eyes roamed the room, landing on an older woman named Evelyn, who had quietly suggested a volunteer committee to help seniors keep up with yard work. "And you, Ms. Do-Gooder," Karen spat, pointing a finger, "thinking you can create some free labor scheme to skip paying standard fines? Ridiculous." Evelyn's face paled. She tried to speak calmly. "I only want to help those with mobility issues. How is that skipping a fine?" Before Evelyn could finish, Karen strode off the dais, approached her menacingly, and towered over her. "Don't test me," she growled. "If you want special treatment, you'll face consequences." I stood quickly, moving closer, instincts flaring. "Karen, step back," I warned, voice low. "That's enough." She ignored me, jabbing a finger in Evelyn's chest. "You think you can undermine me?" Evelyn recoiled, tears forming in her eyes. "All right, that's it," I declared, stepping between them, feeling the old policeman's adrenaline surging. "You need to calm down, Miss Arntley, or step away from the meeting. No one here should feel threatened." She glared at me, something wild in her eyes. But she backed off Evelyn. For a brief moment, I thought that might be the end of it. Yet, the real explosion was about to happen moments later, in an even uglier fashion. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Neighbors murmured anxiously, some edging toward the exits. George attempted to restore order, banging his gavel and pleading for calm. Out of nowhere, Mr. Daly, the same gentleman who had confronted Karen about finances, rose again to ask a final question. "Could we please," he said, voice trembling, "reconsider the harsh late fees for seniors?" Karen spun around, faced him with a sneer. "I gave you my answer, no." He pressed on gently. "But many of us." In a flash, Karen lunged forward. She smacked the papers out of Mr. Daly's hand with a resounding crack. Then, in an appalling escalation, she shoved him backward. He stumbled, colliding with a chair and nearly toppling over. Several onlookers gasped or shouted. My heart pounded. No one expected physical violence at a community meeting, especially from an HOA official. I rushed to Mr. Daly's side, helping him steady. "Are you okay?" I asked. He nodded shakily, eyes wide. Karen's face was contorted with rage, her breathing ragged. She looked around, as if daring anyone else to challenge her. A hush fell across the room, a mixture of horror and disbelief. "You shouldn't push residents," I said firmly, standing tall, my voice resonating with the command I'd honed over years of policing. "Sit down, Ms. Arntley, before you make things worse." She glared at me. "They're all against me. They deserve." Before she could finish, Evelyn timidly tried to help gather Mr. Daly's scattered papers. Karen turned on Evelyn, snapping, "Get away." Then, to my shock, she grabbed Evelyn's wrist with bruising force, twisting it aside. Evelyn cried out in pain. This was no longer a mere outburst. It was assault on defenseless senior citizens. Enough was enough. I stepped in, placing myself between Karen and Evelyn. "Release her," I commanded. Karen's eyes flickered, recognizing challenge. But her grip slackened, and Evelyn pulled free, tears streaking her cheeks. I whipped out my cell phone. "Karen, you've just assaulted 2 elderly neighbors. I'm calling the police." She snarled at me. "You can't do that. This is my meeting. I run the HOA. I'd dealt with countless violent offenders in my time, but rarely had I seen such raw hubris in a suburban setting." "Ma'am," I said calmly, "I am the police. Or I was, until recently. And I know assault when I see it." Karen's bravado faltered. She looked around, seemingly realizing what she'd done. Yet, she was too consumed with rage to fully stop. Meanwhile, A few residents had already dialed 911, describing the scene. I quietly told them to mention that an assault was in progress and that multiple elderly victims might need medical attention. I guided the shaken Mr. Daly and Evelyn away from Karen, who now stood with fists clenched, chest heaving. President George tried to approach her, hands raised in a peaceful gesture. "Karen, let's calm." In another burst of violence, she shoved him too, albeit less forcefully. He stumbled back, more stunned than hurt. The crowd erupted in alarm, some fleeing the room, others calling out for help. That's when I took charge. I'd spent years coordinating SWAT operations and was intimately familiar with local law enforcement resources. Even in retirement, I had direct lines to the sheriff's department and my old department's dispatch. I dialed a special direct number. "This is James Hoffman, retired chief, calling from 789 Riverbend Way, the community clubhouse. We have an out-of-control suspect physically assaulting senior citizens. Request immediate units to respond. Potential injuries." Over the phone, I heard stunned recognition. "Chief Hoffman, we're sending units now." Ordinarily, a SWAT deployment was reserved for armed suspects or high-risk scenarios. But my old department knew me well. If I was requesting urgent backup, it was no joke. The fact that Karen was actively assaulting multiple individuals and threatening further violence made it a possible barricade or hostage situation if she decided to escalate. I turned to the crowd, raising my voice in a commanding yet reassuring tone. "Everyone, please move outside if you can. Give the suspect space. Medical help is on the way." Karen sneered at me, stepping toward the front exit. "I'm leaving. None of you can hold me here." But as she tried to push past me, I moved to block her path gently. "I can't let you leave after assaulting people. The police are coming. You need to stay put." She twisted, attempting to shove me. Despite her surprising strength, I'd been through advanced defensive tactics. I easily parried her arm, stepping aside to keep her from harming me or escaping. "Don't touch me," she roared. "I'm the authority here." "No," I thought, "not anymore." Within minutes, though it felt much longer, the sound of sirens pierced the night air. Squad cars swarmed the parking lot outside the clubhouse. I glimpsed flashing red and blue lights reflected in the windows. Residents parted like the Red Sea, relief washing over their faces. Karen's eyes flicked with panic. She attempted to bolt for a side door, but I stepped in front again. "Don't," I warned. She was out of rational options, cornered by her own violence. The main door burst open, and uniformed officers stormed in, led by Sergeant Daniels, an old colleague of mine. He spotted me and exclaimed, "Chief Hoffman, are you all right?" I nodded. "I'm fine, but the suspect here assaulted multiple seniors." I pointed at Karen, who was staring at the line of armed officers with wide eyes. "She's tried to flee and is still highly agitated." Sergeant Daniels signaled his team, who quickly fanned out to secure the room. One officer knelt beside Mr. Daly and Evelyn, checking for injuries. Another approached Karen with handcuffs at the ready. "Ma'am, step away," the officer ordered. "Place your hands behind your head," slowly. Karen's bravado blazed anew. "I'm not going anywhere. This is my neighborhood. You have no right to burst in like this." She tried to swat the officer's hand away. A second officer joined, repeating the command. "Ma'am, don't resist." For a moment, it appeared she might physically fight them. But the presence of multiple officers, all trained, eventually overwhelmed her illusions of power. She let out a shriek of frustration before the officers pinned her arms behind her. Swiftly, they cuffed her. She spat curses at them, accusing the neighbors of conspiring, calling me a fraud and fake cop. "Karen Arntley," Sergeant Daniels intoned, "you're under arrest for assault. You have the right to remain silent." He read her the Miranda rights in a voice that echoed across the stunned crowd. I watched the scene with mixed emotions, relief that no one else was hurt, sorrow that it had come to this. Karen had gone from an overbearing bully to a violent offender in a matter of minutes. The entire meeting hall was silent, save for the crackle of police radios. Neighbors who had fled trickled back in, eyes wide at the spectacle. Some filmed on their phones as Karen was let out, wrists cuffed behind her back. She shrieked accusations. "You'll regret this. I'll sue all of you." But the police calmly guided her into a squad car. Another officer began taking statements from the battered retirees. George Patel approached me, shaking his head in disbelief. I had no idea she'd be capable of violence. I tried to moderate her behavior, but he trailed off. "Thank goodness you were here, Mr. Hoffman." I patted his shoulder gently. We did what needed to be done. In the following hours, paramedics arrived to check on Mr. Daly's bruises and Evelyn's wrenched wrist. Neither seemed severely injured, but they were understandably shaken. I provided my account to the officers, including how Karen shoved multiple residents, laid hands on Evelyn, and tried to flee. By midnight, the clubhouse had transformed into a temporary command post, with police collecting evidence and official statements from half the neighborhood. Shortly after, Sergeant Daniels approached me to confirm Karen's charges, multiple counts of assault and battery, potentially a felony given the age of her victims. She could also face separate charges for elder abuse if the district attorney deemed it appropriate. "Looks like she'll be behind bars for a while," he said grimly. "Judge probably won't grant her easy bail after hearing how she attacked seniors." I nodded. "I'll cooperate fully with the investigation. This can't be swept under the rug." The next morning, Riverbend Greens buzzed with talk of Karen's shocking arrest. Neighbors shared video clips on social media, capturing her meltdown at the meeting. The local news even picked it up. HOA vice president assaults elderly residents during heated argument. They featured blurred footage of her being handcuffed while some seniors looked on in tears. An impromptu HOA meeting convened the next day, without Karen, of course. President George apologized profusely, explaining that Karen had overstepped many times and that the board never condoned her heavy-handed tactics. He called for volunteers to fill her vacant role, as the board had effectively removed her from position. Yet many residents demanded deeper reforms, worried the HOA had too much unchecked power to begin with. As for me, I spent the morning calming rattled seniors who felt traumatized. Some thanked me repeatedly, praising me for intervening. I insisted I did only what any decent neighbor would do, though privately, I knew my training as a police chief gave me an edge in confronting violent offenders. Marianne made me a batch of oatmeal cookies. Evelyn had her wrist in a bandage, but assured me she'd be okay. One detail overshadowed these attempts at healing: the rumor that Karen's finances were precarious. The looming assault charges could bankrupt her with legal fees. If convicted, she might face not just jail time, but civil lawsuits from her victims, leading to property liens or even foreclosure. Within a week, the district attorney's office formally charged Karen with 3 counts of assault and battery, 2 involving seniors, which carried enhanced penalties. The judge set a hearing to consider bail. Prosecution argued that Karen posed a threat to the community, having assaulted multiple victims. They also introduced evidence of her tyrannical behavior as an HOA official. The judge, swayed by the seriousness and repeated nature of her actions, set a high bail. Karen couldn't post it immediately, so she remained in county jail. Over the next several weeks, more revelations surfaced. Investigators discovered that Karen had mismanaged certain HOA funds, funneling money into side projects that no one else had approved. The board's interim treasurer uncovered suspect transactions for landscape consulting, which turned out to be disguised personal expenses. The HOA members were livid, realizing they'd been footing the bill for Karen's whims. Facing criminal charges for assault and potential fraud, Karen's life unraveled. Her attorney tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the district attorney demanded significant jail time given the age of the victims and the violence displayed. Karen's bank accounts were frozen pending further investigation, and the HOA board initiated legal action to recover misused funds. Her mortgage lender, catching wind of her financial woes, threatened foreclosure if she missed payments. As whispers spread that Karen might lose her house, many neighbors felt no sympathy. "She terrorized us for years," Brian muttered. "Now she's reaping what she sowed." Karen's trial commenced a few months later. I testified, describing how she shoved Mr. Daly, grabbed Evelyn's wrist, and then assaulted George. Mr. Daly and Evelyn each recounted their experiences, visibly emotional. The prosecution presented phone-recorded videos from the HOA meeting, undeniably showing Karen's violent behavior. Her defense tried to argue that she had been provoked by an unruly crowd, an absurd claim quickly dismantled by the video evidence revealing seniors politely voicing concerns. The footage of Karen physically shoving older residents was damning. Additionally, the prosecution hammered in the point that these were vulnerable seniors, making her crimes all the more egregious. Midway through the trial, The HOA's interim treasurer testified about Karen's alleged financial misconduct. Although it wasn't the central assault charge, it painted a broader picture of her disregard for the law. Finally, medical reports showed bruising on Mr. Daly's arm and sprains to Evelyn's wrist, further solidifying the assault case. After hearing closing arguments, the jury took less than a day to deliver a guilty verdict on all counts. The judge looked stern as he addressed Karen in front of a packed courtroom. "Ms. Arntley, you abused your position of authority and committed violence against those who trusted you to serve the community. This court finds your actions inexcusable." He sentenced her to 18 months in county jail, followed by 2 years of probation. Additionally, he ordered her to pay substantial restitution to the victims, covering medical bills and emotional distress. If she could not pay, a lien would be placed on her property, potentially leading to property confiscation. Karen stood frozen, tears in her eyes, as she was handcuffed once more. The gavel fell, sealing her fate. With Karen's sentencing, Riverbend Greens breathed a collective sigh of relief. In the days following her trial, the community rallied around the assault victims. They organized meal trains for Mr. Daly and Evelyn while they recovered. The new, more compassionate HOA leadership revisited the bylaws, removing arbitrary fines and implementing a seniors assistance program to help with lawn care or bin management, ensuring no one faced crippling penalties. President George, shaken by the ordeal, stepped down, feeling guilty for not curbing Karen sooner. The board elected a new president, a soft-spoken retiree who believed in cooperative solutions over heavy-handed enforcement. They rebranded the HOA's image, aiming to prove they were there to serve, not punish. On a personal level, I was gratified to see neighbors regain confidence. Marianne no longer quaked at the sight of an HOA official. Brian joined the new volunteer board as a neighborhood liaison, bridging the gap between the residents and the board. Evelyn, her wrist fully healed, became a key figure in the senior support committee, ensuring no one got left behind. In the weeks after her sentencing, Karen's house went into default. Without her HOA income, she had quietly been paying herself a questionable stipend, and with hefty legal fees, she couldn't cover her mortgage or the court-ordered restitution. The bank repossessed her property, leaving her with nothing but the clothes on her back as she reported to jail. The local paper ran a small piece. Former HOA vice president loses home, begins jail sentence. It was a sobering reminder of how quickly a position of authority could spiral into abuse, and how the might of the law eventually held her accountable. Word spread that Karen blamed everyone else but herself, claiming she was railroaded by lazy seniors who conspired to oust her. But her protestations rang hollow. The evidence was unassailable, the community's solidarity unbreakable. She had no one to blame but her own violent rage. I often reflect on how a simple HOA meeting turned into a shocking confrontation. If anyone had told me that, in my retirement, I'd be calling in a SWAT response to an HOA meltdown, I'd have laughed. But life had a funny way of using my police background once more. In the months that followed, Riverbend Greens transformed into the peaceful enclave it was meant to be. The new board reduced fines, promoted volunteer services, and listened to residents' concerns. A spirit of cooperation replaced Karen's climate of fear. The seniors, once bullied into submission, now found their voices and contributed actively to shaping the neighborhood's direction. Every so often, I get a phone call from someone in my old police department, jokingly calling me the HOA SWAT guy. We share a laugh, marveling at how a suburban spat escalated to a real crisis. Yet, behind the humor lay a serious lesson. No community can tolerate a leader who bullies others, especially those most vulnerable among us. Looking back, I'm grateful I was there to stop Karen's rampage. Mr. Daly and Evelyn remain dear friends, frequent guests at my cookouts. Marianne gifts me fresh-baked goods from time to time. Brian organizes weekly walks around the pond to keep seniors active. The changes are small, but they represent a healthy, thriving neighborhood, a stark contrast to the tension once gripping every block. As for Karen, she serves her sentence in county jail, her property forfeited, her reputation destroyed by her own hand. Perhaps, in a distant future, she might reflect and change. But for the good folks of Riverbend Greens, her reign is over, replaced by a kinder, safer sense of community that will not soon forget the day an HOA tyrant learned the hard way that no one is above the law, especially not in a neighborhood with a retired chief of police ready to act.